I sometimes forget. And so at the beginning of the class, if you think of it, just let me know really quick. You can type it up on over there or just say it out loud. Say, don't forget to hit record, because every now and then I forget, and then that's bad for people who are not showing up, right? Okay, but I hit record this time, and I remembered. We'll see how many people actually show up. So far, not that many people, but I'll give it a little bit more time. We have 40 people in this class. There's quite a lot.
That is a lot. Is that common?
No, but because I think it's because it's an online class, it's easier to accommodate that instead of having to find a classroom to fit 40 students. You don't need to do that for this, so I think they just increased the cap, because the cap for other classes is usually around 30. My other classes that are on campus are all at 30, but this one's 40. We have one more person joining us. And here's the other thing as well, not required, but Alicia, I really appreciate that you have the camera on, and I would love for anyone else to do that as well if they're comfortable doing that. And if at any point you need to turn it off, that's fine too. But it just makes me feel more connected, that I'm talking to real people. So if you feel comfortable enough to share yourself on camera, that would be really cool. You're not required to do it, but I always appreciate it. I'm still just kind of waiting to see. It's the first day, so people might be figuring out how to access this. They might not know how to. Is everyone comfortable navigating this? You can make things bigger or smaller. You can mute things and all that. You can type in a message if you want. Right. Different ways to communicate. And usually people are pretty quiet. Ideally, a class like this would be in person because there's so much to talk about, right? It's a good class to have conversations about deep things. It's hard to do that online, but sometimes it still happens. And I want you to feel comfortable, right? If you have a thought, something makes you think about something else, uh, I'd love for people to bring that up, right? Any point where you have an idea that was inspired by something that we're talking about, it's nice to talk about that. So it's a good thing. Philosophy is pretty much a conversation between people, right? People sharing different ideas, different ways of thinking about the world. And so we can approach it that way in this class as well. Okay, well, I guess I'll sort of get started. First, I'll just say on the first day, I kind of just ramble on a bit, right? I don't necessarily have a whole thing planned. Once we start really getting into it, that will be different, right? I'll have presentations that I'm going to follow very strictly and so on. On the first day, it's a little bit just doing this and that, right? I guess the first thing I can bring up is the textbooks. Did everyone get these? When I was in college, I remember just knowing that you had to get these ahead of time. But nowadays, I find that a lot of people show up on the first day and they don't even know what book to get. Like they're waiting for the instructor to tell them. But that's not the way it works. You always contact the bookstore. You go to the bookstore. Now you can do it online, right? In the old days, you had to actually go to the bookstore, find your class, get the books. Then you come to class with your books already in hand. A lot of students now don't know that for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know why I knew to do that, why people knew that then and they don't now. But that's what happens. People are often confused about what book to get, and they don't even get the book until 2 weeks into the semester. Well, the answer to that is before the semester even starts, you go to the bookstore, either in person or online, and you look up your classes, and it'll tell you exactly what books to get. And then you should have gotten them, a couple of weeks ahead of the semester.
Mine didn't actually
did,
work that way.
What's that?
Well, for my other classes, I did that, but this class, it didn't not show up in Canvas and didn't show up in my bookstore until Sunday. I think it's because
Oh, that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, but they're on their way.
Okay, good. That's really unfortunate. I mean, I set in the order, a while ago, at least like a month ago or something like that. So it should have been in there. But
I added this class last week, so for me,
okay, maybe it has something to do with that.
Anybody else ran into that,
right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, at any rate, it's not going to be the end of the world if you don't, if you don't have the book right away. It's not a big deal. But I just want to tell everybody that's just the way it normally works for classes. If you don't have it yet, that's okay. But these are the two books. And so this is sort of the structure of the class. We're going to look at this book, Huston Smith, The World Religions. This is a pretty famous book. It's kind of a standard go-to book for this kind of class. It's not written by a philosopher per se. There's interesting differences between philosophy and then something like this, which you might consider sociology or anthropology. A lot of times there's lots of different overlap in these different fields, but it's a pretty standard go-to book, and it's basically just it's sort of a tour through the major world religions. Okay, so we're going to look at Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Right, so those are kind of the big world religions. Interestingly enough, Judaism is not actually a huge religion around the world, but it's been so historically important because it basically developed into Christianity and Islam, right? So it's sort of a founding religion that sort of spawned other religions. And this is a theme that we'll look at as well, is the idea that religions don't just stay stagnant, right? They develop over time. And there's a thing called syncretism, where different religious ideas come together to form a new religious idea. And this is how religions develop. We'll look at a little bit of that. See, I'm already going off on tangents. The important thing here is that this is the book we'll look at. Something else I'll say about the book, it's not a very systematic book, right? My background is in philosophy, and in specifically analytic philosophy is what it's called. And analytic philosophers want everything spelled out exactly. They want to understand how the whole system works. They want good definitions. This is not really like that. This tries to get to the psychology of these religions and why it is that people feel connected to these religions. So it's, in a way, it's a weakness from my point of view is that it does not really get down to the nitty-gritty for all these religions. But on the other hand, it does a good job showing why it is that people adopt religions, right? And this is an important thing. For a religion to work, for it to be meaningful, it has to do something for you psychologically. If it's just a bunch of abstract ideas that have no real bearing on your life, that don't do anything for you, then it's not going to work for you, right? So religions, in order to survive, right? Religions are all sort of competing for survival, right? It's the law of the jungle out there for religions. There's so many religions out there. Many of them have died away. Many of them have gone away. Well, one of the determining factors for whether a religion stays alive is, do people connect with this at the psychological individual level, right? And so this book takes that kind of an approach. It tries to show what it is about certain aspects of each of these religions that connects to people. The other thing I should say is that for each of these religions that we're going to look at, it's really complicated. You can't just say, oh, Christianity is this, this, and this. Because there are many, many, many different versions and different interpretations of Christianity. And the same thing is true of Hinduism, right? There are many different forms of Hinduism. Different people in different parts of the world focus on different aspects of the religion. Some of them might be really into all the gods, the pantheon. Some of them might be more into the meditative aspects. So every religion that we look at is not really just this single uniform thing. They have many different expressions throughout the world, many different interpretations, not just geographically, but also over time, right? What Judaism was 3,000 years ago is very different from what it is today, right? So there are different developments, different versions, different interpretations. We cannot possibly look at all of those, right? So we're just going to follow this book and focus on what the book focuses on, right? So this is going to be our grounding sort of book, our grounding way of dealing with all these different religions, because there's already a lot to be looking at so many different religions. It's impossible to look at all the different iterations, all the different interpretations. It's just not possible. So we're kind of just barely scratching the surface, okay, for each of these religions. And that's just the nature of a class like this. Right? You could spend a lifetime studying just one religion, right? Well, we don't have a lifetime, so we have to sort of compress things a little bit and oversimplify things a little bit, right? That's just the nature of the beast, right? So that we're going to have to just try to follow the book, and I'm going to use this book basically as a springboard for my presentations as well. Okay, so this is a tour through each of these world religions where we look at each of the religions and look at some of their main features, see what it is about those religions that has made people connect to those religions. That'll be the focus of the majority of the class. That'll be about 3/4 of the class will be like that. Then we will look at this book. This is written by a philosopher, Daniel Dennett. For a modern day philosopher, he's relatively famous. Of course, still most people have not heard of him because most people don't know about philosophy or read philosophy. There are exceptions to that. But Dan Dennett has written a lot of books that have sold well. He's done a lot of work in the philosophy of mind, right? That's a whole area in philosophy, which is how does consciousness work? How does the mind work? And things like that. He's worked on the problems of free will and determinism. That's a whole philosophical area. But he's also interested in religion, the philosophy of religion. And so we will look at this book. And the whole point of this book is to try to look at religions from a purely, let's say, scientific, naturalistic point of view, right? So you might not share that worldview. So it might be a challenge, right? A lot of people don't have that point of view. We'll talk a little bit more about what it means for a view to be naturalistic once we get to it. But I will just say, that's the approach that the book takes. It's a little bit like doing sociology in general, or looking at different animals and their behaviors. Here's the human animal, and here's a particular behavior that we exhibit. Right? We have religious behavior. It almost seems like an innate tendency to try to connect to some sort of religion, some sort of bigger system of ideas that binds people together into communities with common values and some sort of metaphysical view of everything. Right? That's what religions do, and it's a human behavior. So this book tries to say, well, let's just study that purely from a scientific point of view, where we don't actually assume that any of these supernatural beliefs involved in these religions are necessarily true. We can sort of just put that to the side, put it in brackets. We don't have to make judgments about that. But let's see if we can understand religion as something that evolved over time, just like our cultures did, just like language did, just like organisms did, right? To try to find some sort of origin of religion and then the way in which it developed over time to get where we are today. Right. It's a challenging thing to do, especially if you think, as many people do, that say that you are a Christian, for example. I'm going to use that as our go-to example because we live in America where most people are going to be Christian. If they're going to identify with any particular religion, they're going to be Christian. Well, if you are a Christian, then you think the origin of your religion is given by God himself, right? That's the origin of Christianity if you're a Christian. Christianity didn't develop over time like some sort of natural phenomena. No, of course not. It was given to you by God himself. In Christianity, that's through the word of God in the Bible or through the incarnation of God in the person of Jesus Christ, right? That's the origin of your religion. Well, this book takes a different point of view, right? It takes a different paradigm, as we might call it. Maybe we'll have to talk a little bit about what a paradigm is. But a paradigm is basically a worldview, a lens through which you are looking at a phenomena. So if you are a dedicated, believing Christian, you're going to look at Christianity through that paradigm. right? Through a sort of religious supernatural paradigm, where the origin of your religion is supernatural. This is a scientific paradigm, and it is going to look at the origin of religions as something that's natural, that did not require a God. This book does not try to argue out of your belief. It doesn't try to say that God doesn't exist, although it does examine some arguments for and against the existence of God. But that's the point of the book, is to look at religion as a purely natural phenomena. Okay, so that will be a challenge, but at no point will I ask anybody to renounce their beliefs or anything like that, right? That's not this kind of a class. The point of this class is to try to understand as well as we can each of these world religions through their own religious paradigms, their supernatural paradigms in many cases. For most of the religions, have some sort of idea of a divine order, of supernatural intelligence behind this veil of appearances. And most religions have that. There are certain versions of Buddhism that do not have any kind of God concept required, but most of the religions do have some sort of idea of a God or spirits or multiple gods. Right? That is their paradigm. So the majority of the class, we will look at each of the religions on their own terms, through their own paradigm, through their own lens. But then at the end of the semester, we will look at this book and ask ourselves, well, what would it look like through a non-supernatural lens? What would it look like if we approach this with a scientific paradigm in mind? And the whole point is just to get you to think, right? It's not to get you to believe any particular thing. It's to get you to think about these different worldviews, right? I want you to think about why Buddhists think the way they do, and why do Hindus think the way that they do, and also why would a modern scientific naturalist think the way in which they do? Right? You don't. It's completely up to you to try to decide what's true. Truth is an important concept, by the way, in philosophy, right? We haven't really talked about what philosophy is. Some of you this may be the first time you've even heard of philosophy, but traditionally, what philosophers have been after since, at least 500 BC. We often start with Socrates, but there were philosophers around before Socrates. But say we start with Socrates and his student Plato, right? The whole point of philosophy is to try to know the truth about reality. Right? There's a whole division in philosophy called metaphysics. Metaphysics is about trying to understand what reality is like in general, right? And there's another field called epistemology, which is about knowledge, right? So we want to know what reality is like. We don't just necessarily want belief, right? So here's an interesting difference between religion and philosophy. Religions also try to give you a picture of what reality is like. They do. They have a metaphysics in them. And that's what we're going to look at for each of these religions. What is their view of reality? But philosophers don't just want a belief that you can connect to or that you can vibe with that gives your life meaning. Philosophers want to insist that we should try to actually know what's true. Right? So this is one of the things that separates, perhaps, in some cases anyway, philosophy from religion, because religion, as we all know, faith is an important part, right? Many religions say, well, maybe you don't know with absolute certainty, but you still have to live your life in some meaningful way, and maybe you just have to put your faith into one of these systems. And so philosophers are not against faith. It's just that this is one of the projects of philosophers is, well, what can we actually know, right? What can we know? Can we know anything? Maybe not. Maybe skepticism is right, that we don't actually know anything, but maybe we can. Well, this is what philosophers are after. So when we look at philosophy of religion, we can't leave the philosophy part out of it, right? So we want to ask questions about truth, right? All these different religions make different claims about the nature of reality. Right? The Hindu worldview is different from the Christian worldview. The Islamic worldview is different from the Taoist worldview. They make different claims about reality, and in many cases, they can't both be true. So this gives us a central puzzle around the philosophy of world religions, right? Is the fact that all these different world religions make different claims, and they often conflict. So this raises the issue of truth. Can we actually know the truth about any of these? Now, many people want to take the approach that all the religions are sort of equally valid, right? There's something nice about that. But of course, once you do that, once you try to just extract all the things you like out of all the different religions, you basically created your own new religion, right? What makes a particular religion the religion that it is the particular claims that it makes. Right? So a good example is Islam versus Christianity. Right? Islam looks to the Old Testament, as it's called for Christians, not for Jewish people, right? They don't call it the Old Testament. We'll get into that later, but we can just call it the Old Testament for now. Islam looks at the Old Testament as its founding document. It looks at it as a sacred scripture, just like it does for Jewish people, just like it does for Christians. And it sees Jesus Christ as a great person, a prophet, right? Someone who's held in high regard. Many people don't know this. Islamic people, Muslims, hold Jesus Christ in very high regard. He's a prophet in a long line of prophets that goes all the way back to the Old Testament prophets, and that culminates in Muhammad, the prophet. The prophet Muhammad is the seal of all the prophets, right? So far, so good. It sounds congenial to Christianity, but the big difference is, for Christianity, at least traditional Christianity, Jesus Christ is not just a prophet. He's actually the incarnation of God himself, right? The Son of God, one of the three persons in the Trinity. Islam denies this, right? Muslims do not think that Jesus Christ was a divine being. They also don't think that Muhammad was, right? So Muslims don't worship Jesus as God. They also don't worship Muhammad as God. These are merely human beings who represents God's will on earth to spread his message. Now, if you want to say Islam and Christianity are both true somehow, that kind of doesn't make sense, right? One says Jesus is the Son of God. The other one says he's not, right? It's a pure contradiction. They can't both be true, right? Now, you could say Islam teaches love and Christianity teaches love, so they have something in common that we like. That's fine. That's fine. But if you take those elements that you like and put them into a new package, you basically just created a new religion, right? So all I'm saying is, I like this idea that people have to sort of want to say, kumbaya, all the religions are equally valid. There's something to that, but there's also something problematic about that, because then it forces you to disregard what makes each religion unique, what makes each religion what it is, right? If you try to just sort of make it all very general, if you want to just say, oh, it's all just about loving your neighbor or something like that, right? Okay. I told you I'd ramble today, right? Any questions so far? So I'm just giving you a taste of some of the themes that will come up. We'll look at each of the religions and we'll want to ask, like philosophers, is that likely to be true? Do we know that this is true? These are questions that we'll want to ask. Okay, let's see here. One thing, oh yeah, this will come up again as well. But I want to get this out of the way. I'll say this over and over, but I'll get this out of the way. Does everyone know the word mythology or myth? I'm sure everyone has heard that word, right? I typed it up. Right? Myth is just short for mythology. Although sometimes it can be used in a slightly different way when we say a story is a myth, right? Now, when you hear the word myth, does it make you think a story that isn't really true? I'm asking a general question. You don't have to answer, I guess. This is where, in a classroom setting, I'd force you to answer me, but here I can't. Well, in my experience, a lot of people think. Yes, go ahead.
Well, for me, mythology means the beginning stories that people were telling to try to figure out the world.
Yes. Yes. That's a great way to put it. And that's the way that I want to emphasize. I just want to say, we're going to use the word mythology, but for so many people, that's a word you use to debunk something, right? When we talk about the Loch Ness Monster, and you want to say the Loch Ness Monster doesn't exist, it's just a myth. Right. So a lot of times in everyday usage, people use the word myth to say, well, it's a false idea or a false story. That's not the way that we want to use it here. Right. We're going to, of course, as philosophers, we will want to ask, is this true? Is this likely to be true? How do we know that it's true? But when I use the word myth, that's not what I mean. What I mean is some sort of sacred narrative, some sort of story that explains where things came from, that explains perhaps the origin of the religious community, that often embodies moral values within the stories. Right? So even if you look at something like a classic example of myth, Greek myth, Greek mythology. You've got these heroes that embody certain values, right? You've got heroes. You want to be like these people. They are brave and powerful and beautiful, right? So those are the values that were in play at that time in Greek culture. And so the heroes of mythology end up embodying these values, right? And so we can think in the same way in things like the New Testament, where you have stories about Jesus Christ. We can call these mythology without saying that it never happened, right? So we can just put that to the side for a second. We can just say, well, the Old Testament, a lot of Buddhist literature, Hindu literature, lots of religious literature all over the world, including Christianity, including Islam, has these stories that speak to the people, right? To speak to the religious community, to try to explain what the world is like. Why is it like this? Where did we come from? What is the meaning of life? That try to, again, in the heroes, embody certain values, right? So you see the figure of Jesus Christ sacrificing himself for the good of other people, right? Allowing himself to be crucified in order to set people free. He embodies that kind of value, right? This kind of self-sacrificing love. That's supposed to be something that we should emulate. And that's classic mythology. You have a central figure who embodies certain values that we also ought to emulate. That's what we're going to mean by myth. So when I say it's myth, well, you could believe that it's literally true as well, but it's still the case. If you open up a Bible, you'll read stories that are sacred narratives that talk about things like where we all come from, what the meaning of everything is, what our values ought to be, what kind of persons we ought to be, right? That's what you find. That's what we're calling myth. And there is a distinctive character to myth, usually, that it involves supernatural events that you don't normally see every day. So even if you believe that supernatural events happen, even if you believe in miracles and things like that, we all realize they don't happen constantly, right? Most of the time we live just in a mundane, pretty predictable world where stuff doesn't just magically happen all the time, right? Most of the time it's not like that. But within the pages of mythology, you often have supernatural events like miracles and things like that. Right. So that's another distinctive element of mythology. But I will say, we could extend mythology to things like, here we have Plato, right? One of the earlier philosophers. Plato was a student of Socrates, and Plato wrote these dialogues with Socrates as the main character. Some people think that this is all history. It's not, right? Socrates was a real person, and Plato is basing these dialogues, these little stories about Socrates, on the real person. But it's Plato writing as an author. He is wanting to write something like mythology, right? He's reacting to the old mythology of Homer and Hesiod, where the main characters are these heroes, these conquering heroes, where the main values are power and might and things like that. And Plato wants to bring the Greek people a new kind of hero, right? Socrates is a different kind of hero. And so even this, even though it involves no supernatural events at all, I argue would still be a form of mythology, because Plato is writing a kind of narrative for this new way of life called philosophy. And Socrates is the main hero for philosophy, right? And he still is. Socrates himself, like Jesus in those stories, Socrates died for his cause of philosophy, right? He was condemned to death by his peers, just like Jesus Christ was, right? And so that's part of the mythology here of this sort of martyr for philosophy. So this is what we mean by mythology. And a lot of elements of the story might be true, right? That's a whole different question. When we're looking at it as mythology, we're sort of looking at it as a structural thing, right? What is this thing doing? What is it doing for people? What role is it playing in people's lives? Okay, that's what we mean by mythology. Then a whole separate question is, did these things actually happen? That's a whole other question, right? So I just wanted to get that out of the way. We can talk about mythology without judging, right? Without saying, well, therefore it's false. Right? Everyone knows C.S. Lewis, the guy who wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Yeah, C.S. Lewis was a Christian, and he wrote what is called apologetics, and that doesn't mean apologizing for Christianity. It means defending the Christian faith, right? So C.S. Lewis was a famous defender of Christianity. He wrote nonfiction books about Christianity, and his claim was, yeah, when you look at the New Testament stories about Jesus Christ, it does look like mythology, and it is mythology. However, that stuff really happened, right? So even C.S. Lewis, a Bible-believing Christian, agrees that it's mythology on this definition that I'm giving it. He thought it was true mythology. It was mythology acted out in real life, right? Because we connect as human beings to stories, to sacred narratives. This has been a theme for human beings for a very, very long time. We are storytelling creatures, right? So it's just how we understand the world in many cases, right? We tell stories about ourselves and about the world. That's just something true about us. It connects to us in a much deeper way than, I could pull out a random book of philosophy where it's just a bunch of concepts, just talking about ideas at a very, very abstract level. Only some people are going to be into that. But stories where there's a hero and there's a problem to be solved, people love that, right? That's why people go watch movies and things like that, read books. People love stories. And so stories are a good vehicle for discussing important ideas. So that's what mythology basically is, right? It's just that oftentimes mythology, we associate it with particular religious systems, and oftentimes there are supernatural events going on, right? So that's true in the Bible. That's also true in Homer and Hesiod, these Greek poets who wrote about gods and heroes and so on, right? They're both myth. It's up to you to decide whether or not these myths happen in real life, right? I'm not going to force you to think about that or to believe one way or the other, rather. I do want you to think about it. Right? Okay, that's enough about mythology. It'll come up again. I just want to make sure that when I say something looks like mythology, I'm not necessarily saying a false story, right? Rather, I'm saying it's a story. It's a story with a particular purpose. Then you can decide whether or not that story also really happened. Okay. Make sense so far? Stop me anytime if you need to. I think maybe that's enough of just rambling. A lot of this stuff will come up again. I'm not sure how we're going to do on time today. I'm going to actually switch what I have up. I have a little slide presentation, Introduction to World Religion. But let's do some housekeeping here and look at the look at the syllabus, so you get a little bit of an idea of how this class is going to go. Find. I'm just getting it ready. There we go. Okay. There's not that much to go over here, but you know what time we're meeting. Oh, that's the old. I just updated this, I swear. That's the old syllabus. The time that I have there is wrong, obviously. Right? We're doing 10:30 to 11:55. I just changed that. I guess it didn't save it. Okay, so ignore that part of it. The rest of it is right. I went over the 2 books that you need to get. That's right there. I'm always available, for discussion. If you need to get a hold of me, that is just fine. Catalog description. In order to better understand the people of the world, it is necessary to know about their religions. This survey course explores the origins of religions and its major expressions, including Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and others. Okay, that's pretty straightforward, I think, right? Everyone gets that. That's basically what I've been talking about. Right? We're going to look at each of these religions, and then we're going to theorize, speculate about the origin of religions, where it came from, how it developed. Okay, learning outcomes, to be able to describe the historical, intellectual, and cultural context of various religious traditions and texts. So we'll always do that. We'll always look a little bit about the historical context in which a particular religion arose, to think about the history, to think about the ideas around at the time, to think about the culture. Those are all very important, right? Religions don't appear in a vacuum, right? They appear at a particular place in a particular time to a particular set of people in a particular set of circumstances. And the religion, in order for it to thrive and survive and spread, it must speak to that context, right? So it's important to understand a religion from that point of view, that religions don't just appear out of nowhere. No, they speak to people at a particular time in a particular context. Then we want to be able to analyze philosophical and religious ideas that underlie and are reflected in the practices and principles of various religions, right? Including concepts of nature, ultimate reality, cosmology, and ethics. So here we see again that there's interesting overlap between philosophy and religion. Right? What is philosophy about? Again, it's about trying to understand what the world is like. What is reality like? What is my place in reality? Where did everything come from? What is everything made of? What happens to us when our bodies die? Is there a bigger cosmic story to be told? It's trying to answer these huge, big questions that as human beings, it's perhaps just innate within us to want to ask these things. The philosopher Aristotle, who was Plato's student, said that we all by nature desire to know. It's as though there's something within us that makes us curious about the world around us. Now, especially you see this in children, right? Sometimes that curiosity gets stamped out of you by education or by other people, but children are naturally inquisitive. Right? It's just something that's innate in us. Plato said philosophy begins in wonder, right? So philosophy develops out of this sense of wonder about the world around us. And this is something that's difficult to see in other life forms on Earth. Right? We have this capacity for abstract thoughts so that we are not just in the present moment the whole time. We're not just going from moment to moment, just trying to satisfy all our needs. Some of us are like that some of the time, right? But we also have a capacity to reflect, and many people do this about their own lives, of course, right? What am I doing with my life? What do I not like? Where do I see myself in 10 years? But you can also just have that sense of curiosity and reflection about the world in general, right? So you can imagine early human beings who had just developed language and concepts, sort of for the first time looking around at the world around them and looking at the night sky, looking at the stars, right? If you haven't done this in a while, it gives you a great sense of cosmic feeling sometimes to look at the stars and just to wonder, if you had no idea about modern cosmology or you're an ancient human being, looking up at the stars, it's just sort of amazing and overwhelming, and you just kind of want to know, what are those things, right? That's why people have connected the stars in the heavens to the divine for a very, very long time. Right? People see messages in those stars. That's why we still have astrology today, because people looked at the patterns of stars and thought there must be some sort of meaning behind that. Right? So philosophy begins in wonder, right? Philosophy is about trying to understand what the world is like, and using our best methods to try to get a reliable answer. Religion, in many ways, does the same thing, right? It tries to give you a worldview that explains everything for you, because we are curious and we want that curiosity to be sated. We want it to be satiated. We want to know, and religions offer this possibility of, yes, you can actually have a worldview that explains everything. But the difference between philosophy and religion is the way in which they approach this project. In religion, it is almost always on the basis of some sort of revealed text, some sort of sacred text, like the Bible, right? Like the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, and so on. There's usually some sort of text that is supposed to be the one true answer, right? That you're supposed to rely on and you can't really question it. There are exceptions to this, but very often that's the case. Or it's revealed through a prophet, right? Or it's revealed directly through God, right? So revelation, scripture, those, and authority, I should say, right? Because churches, after a while, become the place where you get your information about the religion. If you think about the Catholic Church and the hold that it had on all of Europe for hundreds of years throughout the Middle Ages, right? There's this central authority, the Catholic Church. That's what tells you what the religion is, and you can't question it, right? So there's a sort of dogmatic element to many religions that says, how do we know that this worldview is correct? Well, this person sent from God said it, revelation. This holy text says it. That's another form of revelation, really. Or this religious authority says it, like a church. Right? So authority, revelation, those are the ways in which religions try to get at these deep questions, to try to get answers to these questions about the nature of life and the universe and everything. Right? Philosophers don't take that approach. They question authority. They don't want dogma. They don't want just one particular text. Philosophy sees itself as in a constant state of development, a constant conversation with the past, a constant dialogue with what philosophers have said in the past. What we learned were mistakes. What we think now that we've learned certain things, right? Philosophy is constantly developing. And by the way, it's out of philosophy that we get science. Right? Science developed naturally out of philosophy. Philosophers ask, how can we know about the nature of reality? What's a reliable way of getting at the nature of reality? Over time, the answer became, well, it looks like we have an innate ability to reason mathematically and logically and geometrically, and we have the ability to observe the world around us. If we combine those two things in a systematic, rigorous way, then we can come to understand what the world is like and why it is that way. So I myself see science as an extension of philosophy. It's not a different thing. It's a part of philosophy. When Newton published his groundbreaking work on physics, it was still called philosophy. It was called natural philosophy because it had to do with understanding the natural world around us. And you could see that science has been very, very successful about this, right? If you think about all these earthquakes we've been having, pretty crazy, right? That really big earthquake, it was a psychedelic experience almost. Ancient people went through this as well. The religious impulse is to say, well, there must be some sort of divine force, some sort of powerful intelligence behind the scenes, as it were, some supernatural beings that are shaking the earth because we have done something to displease them. This is the gods talking to us, right? And this is why we must do good. We must do what the gods want us to do, and that'll maybe stop the earthquakes. Or this is how you end up having sacrifices to volcano gods, right? These volcano gods want something from us. They're making the volcanoes happen, right? That's a religious approach, right? Because you're going to have to rely on the religious authorities at the time, or shamans or priests who believe they have a connection to this divine source. That's the way that religion is going to approach it. Science, as a development out of philosophy, took a different approach. It said, let's carefully study the earth, right? Let's carefully study it and let's model it using geometry and math. That's what the best modern science is, right? Using math and geometry to sort of have a virtual model of what the world is like so that we can understand and predict natural phenomena, right? So now we understand how earthquakes work. We understand perfectly how they work. Right? It has to do with tectonic plates shifting. And there's just no need at all to think that there's a supernatural force shaking the earth. We just don't need that hypothesis anymore because it's fully explained within the scientific paradigm. Right? So that's one way in which you can see philosophy being somewhat different from religion, because philosophy is in this constant state of progressing in different ways. And that progress has led to this scientific revolution, right, that happened some 500 years ago. And the scientific revolution revolutionized, literally, right, our understanding of the world around us, the natural world. And I think most people are not going to argue about that, right? But you have to keep in mind what a amazing sort of thing science was when it really popped off 500 years ago or so, beginning in the modern age with people like Descartes and then on through Newton. All the technology that we have, all the stuff that we're doing right now, right? For people 1,000 years ago, this is like magic. You understand that, right? We get so used to all this technology that we have, but it's sort of magical. That's what magic was supposed to be, right? When you think about old school wizards, what are they supposed to be? Well, they're really wise people that understand the way reality works, and then they can manipulate that reality in order to do wondrous things. This is what science has done, right? Science is magic in that way. We figured it out. We figured out the secrets of the universe, and now we have immense power. Sometimes not for good, right? If you think about an atomic explosion, not necessarily good, but there's no arguing with that, right? We had to figure out, first of all, that everything around us is made out of these tiny little things called atoms that pack within them an incredible amount of energy, and we can actually unlock that energy and create these enormous explosions just by a chain reaction of these tiny little things exploding, right? Basically, oversimplifying it. So we can do wondrous things with this ability to understand the world around us. And this comes directly out of philosophers trying to understand the world, but not doing it through revelation or authority, but by using our innate ability to think logically and mathematically, and our innate ability to take systematic observations about nature around us. Right? So observation, rationality, these combine, these developed out of philosophers trying to figure out a way to understand reality around us in a systematic, reliable way, and that led to science. Okay, this is all related to number 2 there, right? To analyze philosophical and religious ideas that underlie and are reflected in practices and principles of various religions, including concepts of nature, ultimate reality, cosmology, and ethics. So I've been saying that philosophy itself addresses all these things, and so does religion. So there's overlap in what the subject matter is, but there's a difference in the methodology. Right? The methodology of philosophy has been using our innate ability to reason and to observe the world around us, whereas that of religion is usually reliant on revelation directly from a divine source. Okay? And then after that, the authority of whatever church then develops after that, or whatever religious authority develops after that. I know this is a lot I'm laying on you. It won't always be like this. And then interpret sacred texts of a variety of religions, right? So we'll look at that a little bit as well, right? Again, sacred texts form the foundation for many of the religions, right? That's what you go back to as the ultimate authority. When the Catholic Church was losing its hold on all of Europe and Protestantism was becoming a thing, with Martin Luther nailing his theses on the church and all that stuff, what did Martin Luther say? He said, we don't need the authority of the church. We only need the authority of the Bible. Right? This is the idea of sola scriptura. Right? It's scripture alone that is the authority, according to Luther. And so very often when people start arguing about the meaning of the religion or how we ought to interpret the religion, we fall back on a set of sacred texts, right? Where we go and look, well, this is what the Bible says, so this is what's true, right? So that's what we'll look at as well. Okay. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Let me just scroll down a little bit. You can read all this stuff on your own. There's some extra information on here that might be helpful for you, but I don't need to go over that. Grading. This is pretty straightforward class. In a way, the graded elements of this class are not that difficult. It's pretty easy to get a good grade in this class. Okay. The main challenge is just, I want you to show up for this class, or at least to watch the videos, so that you can engage with the ideas that I'm presenting. So in a way, you get as much out of this class as you want, right? You could get away with doing very little, I suppose. You'd be cheating yourself, but if that's what you want to do, then you probably can. There will be these quizzes. There will be a midterm and a final. Right? So each of these is worth about 20%, or exactly 20%, except for the final. Right? So we'll have online quizzes that are going to be about every week, and they'll just cover whatever chapter we just looked at. Okay, and the chapters themselves go over more than I will in my presentations. The quizzes are going to be limited to what I present. So this is another incentive for you to either show up to these meetings or definitely watch the videos, because it'll give you a better idea of what the quizzes are going to be like. Right? So I still want you to do the readings for sure, but it's going to give you a better idea of what to expect on these quizzes if you just pay attention to what I'm talking about in the class. So those are 20%. I will be doing something else this semester to make sure there's no way for me to tell the people that are not showing up live if they're watching the videos or not. There's no way for me to tell. I want to ensure that they do. So what I'm going to start doing is to tell you a quiz code, right, in these classes. So be ready to write that down. We don't have a quiz this week, but next week we'll have a quiz, and you'll need a quiz code to unlock that quiz. You'll get that quiz code here in these sessions. So you can just watch the videos later. You'll still be able to do it, but you need to watch the videos, right? So it's just, this is where most of the class is going to happen, is in these 2 sessions a week. Okay. Then we'll have discussions sometimes. I kind of didn't have a whole lot last time. I should do more because it's a good way to have a no pressure way of talking about these things, because the discussions, you're pretty much guaranteed 100% on those. I'm not going to be grading those with any particular criteria. As long as it looks like you took the question seriously and you didn't write just like 2 sentences, right? You actually got into it. Then I'm just going to say, okay, you engaged with the discussion, you get a 100%. Right? I do want you to respond to at least one other peer. Did I say yes? Just one, right? Yes. So you're in these discussions. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this kind of format. Right? You're going to look at what somebody else has written, and you need to engage with that in some way, right? Either to provide a follow-up point, or to ask a question, or to bring up something related. There's different ways that you can do that, but I just want you to engage with each other a little bit. So if you address the discussion prompt and you respond to somebody else and you do it all on time, you get an easy A, an easy 100%. Okay. So you don't need to put a lot of pressure on yourself to do this. It doesn't need to be completely brilliant. The best thing to do is just to find a way to answer the prompt that you can relate to, something from your own life, perhaps something that you've thought about. That's the best way to do it. I prefer it most that people are just talking as though they're talking to me, right? If we're having a conversation about religion and I say, oh, what do you think about this? And you just talk, be yourself when you write these discussion posts. You're not writing an essay. You're just writing from yourself, as yourself, with your knowledge base, with your references, right, to try to answer the discussion prompt the best you can. Okay, so that's an easy part of your grade right there. And then we'll have a midterm, which is going to be like the quizzes, right? It's mostly true or false, maybe some short answer, no essay requirement. The final will be the same thing as well. I keep planning to do this project. I ended up not doing it last time. I'll try to do it this time. This end project, well, basically my whole idea is, well, you've looked at all these different religions. Maybe you can do this project that I was talking about earlier, right? Where you extract different elements from different religions to create your own super religion, right? So basically the project that I have in mind here, it should be kind of fun. It doesn't have to be a really intense thing, but it's a way for you to think about all the different elements from the different religions that we looked at, right? The metaphysical elements, the moral elements, right? The sacred history, the mythology, all this stuff, the views on what God is and what God wants, to create your own religion. Not that you're going to actually follow this religion. It's just kind of a fun project, right? There are many mythical religions, right? Mythical in a different sense here. There are many religions that are fictional, right? Within video games, for example. Does everyone know the game Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls game? Yes, there are religions in that, right? The developers of those games had to develop religions because that's part of the world. It's hard to imagine a world without religion, right? John Lennon tried to, but we don't have that kind of world. So even in these fantasy worlds, there are these religions that people developed to make it seem more realistic. We have religions in, Star Trek, there are different examples of that. So you can create your own fictional religion, basically. That's the project. And it's just a way for you to think about all these different elements, to try to put them together. And again, most religions develop that way, right? Religions don't appear out of a vacuum. They take elements of religions that are already in place. So we'll see in Christianity how Christianity takes certain Greek ideas and combines them with certain Jewish ideas into some new thing. That's called syncretism, when you take different elements from different cultures, different religions, and form them into something new, right? So that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be engaged in syncretism. You're going to take different elements from different religions to create your own religion. It won't be a huge project. It won't need to be really long. You already have the final exam, the final, online final to worry about. So it shouldn't be a huge project. So this just goes back to what I was saying earlier. This class, the way that it is structured, because it's online, it's kind of pretty easy to get a good grade as long as you're keeping up with everything, okay? In terms of how much you get out of it, it's really, are you engaged in this, what we're doing right here? Are you listening? Are you thinking? That's how you get something out of this class. Okay, any questions on the grading or the workload? Okay, good. Okay. Academic dishonesty. I just do have to mention this. This does not happen very often, but and I'm not having to write any essays. That's usually where this problem comes in. People have to write an essay and then they end up plagiarizing, right? And then they get in trouble. We don't want to do that. However, I have found people plagiarizing even within discussions, right? Within discussion forums. People will plagiarize because they don't want to do their own thinking, right? And oftentimes people don't even realize that they're plagiarizing because they think plagiarizing means copy paste. No, that's not the only form of plagiarizing. Plagiarizing is also when you copy paste something and then change the wording and change this word for this word and rearrange things. That is still plagiarism, and I can sniff that out really easily. I can usually tell when someone's plagiarized something, right? And especially in a discussion forum where I'm telling you, don't write it as an essay anyway. Write it from your own point of view, like you're talking to me. If you are plagiarizing, it's going to be obvious, right? So just avoid that. And this for 99% of you, this does not apply. But in many cases, there's at least one person who thinks, I don't want to do my own work. I'm just going to copy something, change it around. Just please don't do that. Okay, that's all. Disruptive behavior does not really apply here, right? Since this is not an in-class kind of a thing. Okay. Okay, any other questions on the syllabus? That's really all I needed to go over. Does everyone know how to access Canvas? Obviously, how to get around in Canvas. I should say the best way to keep track of what's happening is don't click on all the different links on the side like assignments, quizzes. Don't go there. Go home. Go to the home page to the modules, right? The week by week modules. So press home in Canvas and then you'll see week 1 and then coming up week 2. And there you'll see exactly what's coming up. You'll see what reading to do. You'll see everything there. So don't click on each of the individual things. Sometimes there's stuff there from previous semesters that doesn't make sense, right? All that is a little messy. The home area is clean. For each week, it'll say exactly what you're reading, what the quiz is, what the discussion is, what extra material is that I'm suggesting. And I'll have a little thing on the very right that says to do, right? This is what's coming due. So always do that. When you go into Canvas, click home, go to the week by week modules. That's the best way to do it. Okay. Well, I'll start looking at the slide here a little bit. We probably won't finish it. We'll work more on this next time. Well, first of all, let's look at this painting here, right? This is, I can't remember quite when this was painted. It looks neoclassical to me. So it's, it's not going to be a super old painting, maybe a couple hundred years old. Right? But it's depicting something from a very, very long time ago. Does anybody know offhand? You probably don't. It's not a very famous painting. Well, what it is the Pythagoreans. Does everyone remember Pythagoras? The Pythagorean theorem, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That whole thing. Everyone learns this in high school, right? You can figure out the length of a right-sided triangle by calculating the length of the two other sides. This got associated with Pythagoras. We don't know who actually came up with this theorem, right? The Egyptians probably already knew this. They needed it for engineering and stuff like that. But the Pythagoreans were a cult, a religious cult. And, what's the difference between a cult and a world religion? It's basically cults are much smaller, right? That's basically what it is. Cults are not integrated into society. But in terms of belief systems, it's going to be very similar to other world religions. So Pythagoreanism never turned into a world religion, but it was a cult religion that existed for quite a long time. Even after Pythagoras died, this cult still existed. Some of their main beliefs were this philosophical idea, interestingly enough. So Pythagoras sometimes is called a philosopher. The idea that we can understand the world mathematically, right? That there are patterns in nature. And if we can just uncover those patterns, we uncover the secrets of the world, right? So kind of a proto-scientific approach, but ultimately it was kind of a mystical thing, right? This turns into numerology very quick. Numerology is not scientific at all, right? So it's an interesting kind of religion in a way, right? Because it tries to provide what religion provides, but it does it through focusing on numbers and mathematics. And so this is why, they're so heavily focused on mathematics that they carried around all these secrets of mathematics, like this theorem that tells you how to calculate one side of a triangle by looking at the other two sides. This is why that theorem gets associated with Pythagoras, because these Pythagoreans were walking around with all this mathematical knowledge that was a part of their religious system. So a very interesting kind of a thing. Pythagoreanism died out eventually, right? Most religions die out. This is, again, once we come to this book, we'll look at this idea more, that religions are almost like living organisms. Right? They need a certain environment to thrive. And when things change, they might just die out. And only the most powerful survive, right? This is why we have these world religions now that have existed for a very long time. Right? They were the ones that survived the jungle, right? The law of the jungle applies here. That's how evolution works for organisms. The weak ones die out. Only the ones that can sort of survive and procreate and keep going, those are the ones that end up thriving. Religions are like that as well. Pythagoreanism died out. But what I like about this painting is that it really encapsulates that even a religion that only existed for a little bit, look at the people in this. Look at how devoted they are to this. How their whole, you can see it just in their postures and what they're doing, right? Who knows whether they're probably looking at the sunset or the sunrise, is my guess. This would have been part of it. Again, the sun is often a representation of God, or it is God himself in some sense, right? For ancient people, sun is the source of life, the source of light. So it's natural to view it as a heavenly divine being. Again, that link between the heavens and the divine has existed for a long time. So here you have these people engaged in religious activity, maybe some sort of worship, right? This is very similar to if you go to a Baptist church locally. You're going to see similar behavior. You're going to have songs. You're going to have this sort of reverential attitude. Look at them on their knees. These people are true believers. They are so fully immersed in their religious way of life. And that's how religions work. To them, this is the truth. Right? This is what makes life meaningful. This is the key that unlocks the secrets of the universe. That's what it's like to be in a religion. That's what it's like to be a really religious person. Every religion has their stragglers, their hangers-on. There are so many Americans who say, yes, I'm a Christian. And what does that mean? Maybe they go to church on Wednesday. They'd rather not, but that's what they do. But yes, I do believe in Jesus Christ and the Bible. But they just say it, but they go on with their lives, right? There's that type, but every religion has their true believer, the person who's fully in it, who sees the whole world through that filter, through, again, to use that word, that paradigm, right? So here you see people fully immersed in their paradigm, looking at the world through that lens of this particular religion that has come and gone, and nobody even knows much about it anymore. But to them, this was it. This was the secret of life, the meaning of life. life. So this gets us to that paradox again, right? Of, well, there you've got all these different religions with different paradigms, and the people within that religion are fully convinced that they have got it. They've got the true way of looking at things. They have unlocked the secrets of the universe. This gets back to that issue that philosophers want to talk about of truth, right? What is actually the truth? And should you believe something if you don't actually know that it's true? It's very easy to become certain that you're right. Certainty is a psychological condition. Certainty is a way that you feel, right? You feel that it's completely right. You feel that it's true. That's not the same as knowledge, right? That's not the same as that type of certainty where you actually know that it's true, right? So we can recognize that for each religion, you have a certain set of people who are fully immersed in it, and for them, they are certain. But are they right? Do we know that they are right? Is a particular religion right? Are all of them involving ideas that we don't actually know are correct? Or perhaps that we can actually say, yeah, no, that's probably not true. Right? People are willing to say that about other religions, of course, right? So again, just to go back to Christianity, if there are any religious people taking this class, you are most likely to be a Christian. As a Christian, you're going to have to tell some sort of story about why it is that those people over there believe what they believe, even though they are subjectively self-certain, just like you are. You have to come up with some sort of idea about why they're wrong. What often happens, the explanation from a Christian point of view has been that, well, within Christianity, you don't just have God, you also have Satan, right? Satan is a fallen angel and who's here to lead people astray. So the Christian idea often is other religions exist because Satan is there to confuse people. Right? They are just confused. Hindus following Hinduism and the gods that are involved in Hinduism are perhaps unknowingly worshiping demons, right? They have a false idea of reality from within that paradigm. Right? If you believe that one particular religion is correct, you have this problem to deal with. That must mean that all the other religions are somehow wrong and deluded. So then you have to explain, how is it that everyone else in the world that's not your religion, how did they come to be so deluded? How come they did not get it right? How come they don't know, like you do, that your religion is correct? These are all just puzzles to think about. It's also possible that they're all equally invalid in some sense, at least when it comes to the question of, well, the mythology, is it actually true, right? Do we actually know that God said this or God did this? Do we actually know that this sacred scripture tells us everything that we need to know in absolute terms? Do we actually know that, right? This question arises again and again. Well, maybe they're all equally sort of on the same ground. Maybe one of them is uniquely correct, or maybe they are all somehow correct. That each of these views has their own puzzles to think about, their own set of problems to think through, right? So hopefully you will think through these problems. I am not trying to lead you down any particular path, right? I'm here to present you with different problems, different things to think about. That's my role here. So I don't ever want to push one way of thinking about it, but I will bring up things that are controversial, right? That's just part of taking any philosophy class. Any philosophy class that's not challenging you in some way is not a good class, right? And if we're thinking philosophically about world religions, of course we have to do this. We have to ask these tough questions, right? But my role is to ask the tough questions. It's not to make you believe one particular answer. That's just not my role. Okay. Pythagoreans, right? Look at them. They are certain that they've got it. I believe that they're genuine. That's the thing too as well, right? Sometimes religious skeptics and atheists think that everyone's just lying, right? I don't think that. I think people who are immersed in a religious way of life truly do believe it. At least that the true believer type, right? Again, you have people who just sort of say that they belong to a religion, but it doesn't really mean much in their life. I'm not talking about those people. That's a whole different can of worms. But at least the people that are truly immersed in their religious way of life, they have a certain certainty about it, and I believe that they really believe it. Right? Okay, we're almost done here. A few more minutes. We won't actually get to finish. One of the things we want to think about here for a second, but it ends up actually being kind of a moot point, right? The idea of definitions. Right? This is a philosophy of religion class, so you might want to say, well, what is a religion? Right? What is the definition of a religion? Notice, though, that everyone already knows good examples of religions, right? Everyone is at least familiar with the idea of Christianity, and most people know a little bit about some other religions as well. You kind of have a pretty good idea of what's involved in religions, right? Without being able to define it. So it's an interesting thing about definitions here. When Plato has Socrates as a main character, Socrates does this curious thing. He's always asking people for definitions. And when they fail to deliver the definition, Socrates says, well, I guess you don't know what that thing is, right? Tell me, what is justice? Tell me, what is love? The people try to give a definition, but then Socrates comes up with a counterexample. And then, oh, yeah, I guess my definition wasn't complete enough. Or maybe my definition was too general. And we see this pattern over and over in the dialogues, right? Socrates wants you to give a definition. The person is confident that they know what the thing is. They know what love is. They know what justice is. And they try to say what it is, but they fail, right? So over and over, Socrates shows that people don't actually know the definitions of these things. Does this mean that in order to know what something is, you need to be able to give a definition? I don't actually think so. I think it's very difficult to give a definition for many, many things that we do have a general idea about, right? So people know what love is, right? If you've, at least I hope so, right? If you've experienced love, you can recognize instances of injustice, right? So you must have a general concept of justice. Are you able to articulate really, really well what justice really is, to give a definition of it? I don't think so, right? So I don't think that to know what a concept is or to know what it means that you need to know how to define it really rigorously. Right? So I think people already have a pretty good idea of what a religion is, even if you can't give a really good definition of it, right? But people do try. People try to give a definition of religion, and I think all these definitions kind of fail. Okay, they kind of fail, especially because they often reduce what is something that's very, very complex into something simple. Religions are complex. They're very complicated. It's a big system. Right? It involves lots of ideas, but it also involves communities. It involves practices. It involves experiences. It involves things like worship. It involves churches. It involves communities. I don't know if I said that already. It involves all these things. It's a very complicated sociological phenomena. Very complex. So many of these definitions try to just zero in on one aspect of religion and try to say, that's what defines religion. I think it's a mistake, but let's look at a few examples. Okay. This here says, this is from the World Religions from Ancient History to the Present. I think I have this over here somewhere. Got this in my little religion library over there. Religion has been present at every level of human society from the earliest times. Well, so far so good, right? That's just describing the history of it. That's something we'll get into later as well. But what exactly is it? Now, this right away, if this was an essay written by a student, you don't want to do this thing where you say the dictionary defines it. It's such bad writing. But that's what they did here. The Oxford English Dictionary defines religion as the recognition of superhuman controlling power, and especially of a personal God entitled to obedience. Belief in a god or gods is found in most religions, but different superhuman powers are often revered, particularly connected with the dead. There are many other elements of religious life which cannot be included in this short definition, but which appear in this encyclopedia. Okay, so you see that it right away corrects itself, right? It gives you a definition, but then it says that's not really enough to understand what a religion is, right? There are many other elements of religious life, but very often discussions about religion focus in on this particular aspect, the belief in gods or supernatural forces. Not all religions involve this, but traditionally, especially very early religions, were often like that. Right? It talks about superhuman powers that are connected with the dead. Yes, our earliest forms of religious belief have to do with ancestor worship, right? The idea is, you've got, let's say you have way back in the day, way before large cultures and societies existed, you have a small tribal village and you have the tribal elders who are in charge of everything, and they are wise, they've lived for the longest, they know how things work, and then they die. But it's natural for human beings to believe that even though the body has stopped functioning, that consciousness that was within that body still continues to exist. And all that wisdom and power that was there in the village elder still exists. So now, very naturally, you get this idea that out there somewhere in the air, right? Can't say exactly where, but there's this consciousness floating around in the world around us. And we can still connect with that consciousness. And that consciousness can still guide us. And it can help us. And it can help the crops grow. We just need to pay homage to that consciousness. We need to revere these ancestors, maybe through sacrifices or through making altars or through making songs that worship them, right? So the seeds are laying here for this idea that there's a supernatural being out there that's powerful that can help us, and we can communicate with it. And if we do the right things, if we do A, B, and C, and D, then it will help us. So there's this relationship that forms with this disembodied consciousness out there that has power to control things within our world, to make miracles happen, to make the crops grow, to give guidance, whatever it may be. Right? This is very early religions developed in this way. Now you could see how a concept like that could sort of blossom into something else. You could think to yourself, well, what if it's not just ancestors? What if there's just a whole class of beings that are different from us, that are conscious, they're personal beings, but perhaps they don't have bodies, or perhaps they have bodies, but they live on a different plane, right? So you have the Greeks talking about the gods either living up in the sky or really up high in mountaintops like Mount Olympus. We find this idea in the Old Testament as well, by the way. The Old Testament God is often found in the mountains. It sometimes says that he actually lives there, right? Where does Moses go to get his commandments? He goes up the mountain to meet God because that's where God lives, right? So this idea becomes, it's not necessarily just our ancestors that are out there controlling things. There are, in fact, disembodied or embodied consciousnesses that exist on some other plane, and they have the power to affect things down here. And as long as we worship them in the right way and have a good relationship, then it's good. It's a reciprocal thing. This is why the Greeks developed this idea that there are gods in charge of many different elements in life down here, right? That's why you have the god of wisdom, the god of hunts, the god of war, the god of the sea, right? You have all these different gods that have their own departments in the world. Right? So you can see then that, yeah, religions traditionally do have this focus on the idea that there's not just human beings that connect with each other. There's not just your embodied consciousness right here. There's a whole other realm of existence where a supernatural, and we mean by supernatural something like a consciousness that's not embodied here the way that we are as biological beings, that they are somehow supernatural, right? We are natural beings. We might say that there's a supernatural aspect to us if you believe in something like a soul that's not material. We'll put a pin in that for now. But the whole idea is that religions often revolve around the idea of gods and spirits. And those are beings that are conscious and that we can communicate with, and they have the power to affect things here in our life. Okay? That's still true for major world religions. That still describes Christianity, for example. Right? That's still true. This is something that was true of ancestor worship, and it's something that's true in Christianity. This element of communing with this divine realm, right, in a sort of reciprocal situation where we do the things that please the gods, and then the gods will help us. And what happens when there's a huge earth-shaking event, like a little earth-shaking event, like an earthquake, or a flood, or a volcano eruption? So when something of that large scale happens to human beings, they then assume that we must have done something to anger the gods. When these huge events happen, these huge catastrophes happen, they're so large that we can't comprehend how they could happen naturally. We assume it must come from this very powerful source that's sort of affecting things from the outside realm, affecting things here. That's why you have stories in the Old Testament about God flooding the earth, because human beings were so rotten that he had to start all over with Noah and his family. Everyone knows that story, right? God looked down on earth and saw that every single person was rotten, just so bad. Even the little babies, I guess, even the toddlers, they all had to be drowned, right? Because they were not doing the right thing. And only Noah and his family survives. Well, that's classic. That's classic religious mythologizing, because it's trying to explain these catastrophic events through this type of system of, here we are, things happening within the natural world, and then there's this whole other supernatural realm that is not impersonal, right? It's not some sort of abstract force. No, these are beings with minds that think about us, that we can communicate with in some cases. They have certain wants and desires. They have expectations from us, right? So we're sort of projecting personality into that supernatural realm. We're projecting the idea of a person into this supernatural realm that explains the things that happen here. So this definition hits on something very important in most of the world religions and the history of religions. But there's much more to religions than just belief in God, or belief in gods, or belief in spirits, or belief in ancestors. There's much more to it. So if we want to reduce all of religion just to this, that would be a mistake. Okay? There's much more to religion than just this. But I think it is fair to say that this is something that defines many religions. At least part of what defines them is the belief in God or gods or spirits. But these all are structurally very similar. They're all these sort of quasi-hidden elements behind the normal order of things, behind the natural world, right? But they can sort of reach into the natural world and affect it. And religions are then born about what this relationship is between us human beings and this divine realm out there, right? So that's an important part of religion. And it is 12. I meant about 5 minutes over, so we will stop here and we'll continue this on Thursday. So thank you for those of you who showed up. Thank you, Alicia, for making this feel like I'm talking to real people. I really appreciate it. Okay, so unless there was any questions.
I appreciate your enthusiasm for your subject.
Oh, good. I mean, this is endlessly fascinating to me, so I could talk about this forever. Okay, good.
I also recognize I took your critical thinking class in the summer.
Wow, what's that?
I took your critical thinking class.
Oh, yeah.
Summer, and I actually really didn't like it very much.
Yeah.
But I really appreciated how it changed some of the ways that I thought.
Okay, very interesting.
Took it in and took it to heart, and I can hear some of the elements of that in your approach to this, and so.
Oh, cool.
So while I struggled with reducing things, I really appreciated the concept. So I was glad to see that you were teaching this class.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I do recognize your name at least. And yeah, the critical thinking class is a very different class from this one, right? Very, very different. And
Very, yeah.
it has to be a certain way. I have more freedom with this. Critical thinking, I have to teach those things specifically. If I
It's
could have my
very
own
rigid.
critical thinking class, I might do it differently, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
But so yeah, this will be a very different experience for you.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody have a good day. Pause the recording.